Good afternoon from Austin, Texas. On behalf of the NMC, I'm happy to welcome you to the NMC Beyond the Horizon Integrating Student Data Across Platforms. The growing use of data mining software in online education has great potential to support student success by identifying and reaching struggling students and streamlining the path to graduation. This can be a challenge for institutions that are using a variety of technology systems that are not integrated with each other. This was the first topic featured in our recent publication, Scaling Solutions to Higher Education's Biggest Challenges, an NMC Horizon Project brief. So today we're going to go into silo busting territory. A recent presentation of mine, I said silos are good for farming, but not good for data. So what we're going to talk about is how to break down those silos and make sure that data is integrated across systems. I'm going to share a link to our publication here. In case you haven't read it, we're hoping to, in some ways, kind of flip the program so that you had a little bit of information to get you started as we dive into the topic today. In this one-hour event, we will begin with a higher ed thought leader sharing his insights onto his approach to the integration of student data. And I will then assign you to breakout rooms where you will work in small groups to engage in deeper discussions about student data and to begin brainstorming solutions to the challenge. I am your host today, Alex Freeman. I'm the Senior Director of Membership and Special Projects at the NMC. I am joined by the NMC's Annie Davis, Gordon Jackson, and Brian Yunke. Okay, so we're going to have a working session today that will require your active participation come the second half of the program. We don't have all the answers here, but we are looking to you, the participants, to help us solve this challenge with one notable leader in the field who has made progress in the specific context as kind of our leader within the program. We'll break out into facilitated discussion groups, have a number of questions to approach, and then we will come back together and report out what we discussed. And if there's any lingering questions that you have in what I call the parking lot, something that we weren't able to answer in the breakout session, but you wanted to bring in to see if we can provide answers or connect you with those that do, that's how we're going to proceed with today's events. And if you're on Twitter, so are we. We have over 18,000 Twitter followers. Probably not as many as Grumpy Cat, but enough that your voice will be heard when we discuss this challenge. Today's hashtag is DLN Chat. Now on to the presenter and one of your facilitators for today, Jack Seuss. Jack is the Vice President of Information Technology and Chief Information Officer for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I want to take it away, Jack. I'm going to unmute you and give you the floor.
Oh, thanks, Alex. I really appreciate getting a chance to talk to people. This is a topic that I'm really passionate about and one that I've been working on for a number of years. And so I don't have all the answers. I don't think anyone in this space has all the answers. I'll share with you some of the things that I've seen work and some of the challenges I've seen happen over the last few years. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So great. So the first thing that I've got 5 slides that I wanted to just sort of use to talk through the discussion for 10 minutes or so. And so the first thing I wanted to highlight, and there's a link in the Etherpad as well as in the notes, but I had done an article back in November for EDUCAUSE with a colleague, Henry Childers. Hank is at the University of Arizona, and he's been really one of the thought leaders. And it was a real privilege to get to do this article. And as part of doing this article, it really helped shape some of what we're doing, because we learned a lot from the University of Arizona, as well as reinforce some of the things that we were planning to do. And so I really encourage people to leverage the fact that there's a lot of people doing interesting work in this space, and leveraging the community aspects of our higher ed area is great. First thing I wanted that Hank and I wanted to really focus on was I wanted to really think about the fact that there are many stakeholders in thinking about student success. And often one of the challenges that comes up is we don't think about all the stakeholders who have a role to play in making sure that students are successful, and really understanding their perspective. And so one of the things that I did in this slide is I highlighted 6 different groups that I think really have an important role. And the first, and certainly not the least, is students. Students have to have some agency in what they're doing to be able to be knowing they're on the right path. If you go and you look at the article, inside the article that we had written, we go through each of these stakeholders and we sort of talk about key questions that you need to answer. We also try to point out some of the systems that you need to be getting data in order to answer the questions that arise for that particular stakeholder. And as you would expect, students and instructors have a much different perspective than what you might look at as academic administrators or IR professionals. Often academic administrators and IR professionals are sort of looking at the micro level of success. How are we doing as an institution? Whereas students and instructors are really looking at it in a micro level. How am I doing, or how am I doing in my class? And I think that perspective really requires you to be thinking much more broadly about how you look at data and what kinds of data you're going to need ultimately to be able to support all of these different stakeholders that are there. The next thing that I wanted to spend a little time talking about is really thinking about how do you organize and get started in these sorts of endeavors. As we show in the last one, you've got groups from students, instructors, student affairs, IR, academic administrators, IT. There's a whole wide range of people that need to be involved, and really understanding who is going to be involved in your group is really key. Now, the 3 models that I've seen, one would be the hierarchical model. This is where you align the entire institution around student success. You create a position. This can work very effectively. It's just a tremendous challenge to find the right person who can come in and really manage such a large enterprise when you think of all of the groups that are involved in student success. And so I often say that in this particular model, if you can find that and do it, it's great. But it's sometimes like trying to find a unicorn, that these are hard people to find in our world. And so you need to think about, is that going to be the way that's going to work best for your campus? The most common model is really the committee model. This model is focused on coordination and alignment around all the different activities that we have. Some of the challenges with this model is it really requires a campus culture. It's the easiest one to set up, but if you don't have a culture around collaboration, you may find it difficult to break down the silos. One of the other things that I think results in the committee model is it tends to be consensus driven. And so you won't see as many big ideas. And if you're trying to move an institution dramatically, it's sometimes harder to do that in a committee model. This will be more incremental change. The last one is really sort of looking at having the IR, or business intelligence unit, established and sort of oversee predictive analytics efforts. And these often are when you're really just trying to use a basic amount of data, usually data that you have on students in your student system, to be sort of driving a risk calculation and using that to go through and do some very specific kinds of functions that would be there. That can work well, but it's often one that doesn't fully integrate in all of the external data you find in student affairs that might be more qualitative or around student engagement. Another question that I see coming up a lot in the world is build versus buy or both. I'm going to show you what UMBC's done. We're really in this hybrid mode where we've built out a fairly robust analytics environment, but we're also customers of EAB, of Blackboard, and Civitas for different products that they have in the space. The challenge that I see a lot of campuses have as they start in the build space is it's often IT driven. And as a result of being IT driven, it's often more focused on what technology to use than what questions to solve. And I think that can be a mistake when you're starting out. It's really more important to be focused on what questions are you trying to solve around student success. The buy situation is one where often you will be in a situation where provosts or senior leaders really feel a tremendous amount of pressure and they want to make quick progress. And so they are at meetings and vendors say, we have solutions to provide you. These solutions can be very effective. They can provide the best short-term return on investment, but there's also an opportunity for pitfalls. You know, if you don't have good high-quality data in your student information systems, if you don't have consensus that that data is useful from an IR perspective, you can often find that it's very difficult to get these systems up and running and have everyone agree that the data that they're producing is accurate. And so I think that that's one where you just have to be very diligent in looking at those systems. Lastly is this hybrid, which what I like to have people think about is you want to ultimately produce some quick wins, but what you don't want to do is always be reliant upon a vendor. You should be hopefully beginning to build out your own analytics capabilities so that over time you can take on more activity within yourself, but leverage the commercial products for what they do best, especially if you have specific needs that they're aligned to do. I wanted to take a second and just sort of show the environment that we have here at UMBC. What we've done is level 3 is really this integration layer. It's what we call our business intelligence system. We end up integrating data from finance, our human resource, student systems. We were an early customer for Blackboard Learning Analytics, and so we integrate learning analytics. We also integrate data from all of our many of our third-party software as a service applications. So we want to know what dorm you're in or what resident advisor you have. We want to know whether or not you have been at career services or whether or not you have done certain things where we've got systems, we're pulling that data in to the business intelligence system. Lastly, what we've just started in recent time is we're starting to pull data in from student affairs, where we now are scanning for any club and activity, whether students have attended or not. And we're doing this more to find out who is not attending any activity, who's not engaged with some of the clubs and organizations that we have, because we think that that's going to be an important component to finding out whether or not students are going to stay and whether they're going to be successful at UMBC. Built on top of our business intelligence system is a set of tools, predictive analytics, early alert system, and then at the very top, we're building out new advising systems, new 4-year planners, as well as a new iPass system for supporting student advising and pathways to graduation. And so what we have on top of all of this is really leveraging our business intelligence system, but it's also leveraging some of the results that we're getting out of predictive analytic tools that we've bought. So now let me go back to the slides and just sort of say, coming up this summer is the OLCacelerate Toolkit. I had an opportunity to participate in a meeting in November when they brought people together to be thinking about it. These 6 items that you're going to be seeing more and more come out from NMC in the summer are really some of the key questions that we still have to answer and that there aren't perfect answers for. Like, how do you use this data that you're collecting for personalization? Can we begin integrating career pathways with some of the courses that we have so that students graduate career ready? Recognizing that we have some inherent bias in some of these weed out courses and trying to work with departments to be rethinking the pedagogy around some of those courses that we have. Recognizing that while data is important, people are essential, and how do you take data and actually do something with it to make a difference? And then the last 2 is really understanding how you can collect and integrate as much data as possible. And then lastly, coming up with the campus conversations around transparency and data privacy. This last one is one that's a big issue, in my opinion. We have to be thinking about how we're transparent, how we use this data, and not be in a situation where we're tracking every little thing about students. And so, Alex, that's sort of summarized where I see sort of this student success at what I would call the 20,000-foot level.
All right, thank you, Jack. Well, I'm going to give a moment and reorganize everyone into breakout sessions led by a facilitator. Okay, so everyone should be coming into our main meeting space. Okay, so I popped into the different rooms and I was get to see kind of the discussion move along, but let's share out, since not everyone could go into the other rooms, let's share out what the topics of discussions were, and if there are any parking lot items that we want to pitch to Jack as a Q&A that we can either kind of have a discussion about, a quick Q&A, or jot it down as something we need to follow up on. So the first group, we had 3 different groups. Jack was our first leader. I want to turn it over to Jack. What kind of discussion did you have in your group, and what kind of lingering questions do we have?
So I think it would be fair to say that the group was all over in terms of just how we're starting in this process. And so some are starting on some activities, some are just trying to understand what might be the possibilities. And so I think understanding what some important questions might be and how to get answers and what kind of data is needed to get answers to those questions could be real helpful for people getting started.
Hi. Yeah, so our group, mostly people were interested in kind of learning more. We were just starting out, or they're very in the beginning stages of implementing these systems. What was interesting was it seemed like almost everyone in our group went with the buy versus build their own. But in that buy, they had the idea that, it was a really good starting point. It would really cut some time off of having to build their own, but later on wanted to personalize it for their students and their campus. So definitely a lot of hybrid models that we've seen. And then one of the questions that we had for Jack and his experience was, if you had what are your privacy policies, and were they homegrown, and in order to align with federal policies that there are, or state. So just kind of more about the data privacy and how you guys have dealt with that.
So that's a great question. It's one that I'm actually going through right now. So the initial model of this is treating the data as it's FERPA. And much like we treat all data that's FERPA in a way where we train anybody who's going to get access to it as to what they can and can't do with the data. One of the things, though, that we're recognizing is that we have to be more transparent. And so we're developing some processes to notify students that we're going to be collecting this data. We're developing some other activities and training. We've got training for faculty, but we want to end up sort of beefing that up to be emphasizing this a little bit more. But I would say it's an evolving spot, and that's one of the areas I'm really interested in seeing what comes out of the OLC toolkit, because I think coming up with good privacy and policies is going to be essential as we start to roll this out.
That's a good point. I want to just make a mention of the NMC Summer Conference. We're going to have our summer conference in mid-June in Boston, and as Jack mentioned, we're going to be looking at that OLC toolkit. So if you are really interested in this getting more information, this is a great place face-to-face to do so. So just wanted to plug our summer conference. Next, take it over to Brian. Brian, what did y'all talk about in your breakout room?
Thanks, Alex. About 95% we talked about privacy and student data, and even more deeply around the ethical uses of the data and how it can be used, and can we use it that way. With platforms like new modern learning management systems and other of these kind of systems, it's more than just administrators and advisors that have access to the data. Faculty who have always had kind of their traditional data now have access to more data from these newer learning management systems that perhaps could give them the ability to do things that they hadn't been able to do in the past, generally to help students and provide more successful college career for them. However, the questions we were raising were, what are the policies around these types of uses of data? Are policies being developed, and really what could you do with it, and how? Someone had brought up an example of taking some of this data and dumping it into a web-based resource that could help analyze it. Are there some ethical concerns around that, pulling it and using a system outside of the institution? And so that was really kind of the focus of our conversation, was really about privacy concerns and the use of data and the ethics around it. In fact, to the point where some institutions really haven't gone deeper into leveraging student data in these platforms because of concerns of the ethics around it.
All right. So,
Could I, Alex, mention one thing, and that would be that one of the key policies we don't often talk about, but I think is going to be most important, is going to be data retention policies. Because one of the things that we do in higher ed is we tend to never get rid of data. And this is a spot where you really want to be anonymizing it, after the student leaves, or after a year after you've acquired, especially if you're doing clubs and organizations. I joked with you about, I don't want to be tracking for 40 years that a student was in the anarchist society, and then when they're 60 and they run for political office, somehow it comes out that they were in the anarchist society when they were in college. So, it's things like that I agree, we really have to be thinking about how we use this data and how we get rid of it when we no longer should be using it or keeping it.
Okay. Our Zoom group chat is open for specific questions. I was looking through there. I see some comments, but I don't see any specific questions. Feel free, if you have any, to go ahead and put them in there. We've got about almost 10 minutes left in the program to answer any of those, or dive deeper into issues of privacy. The buy option seems like that's what Annie's area was most interested in. Please, let's ask us specific questions, and we'll see if we can't help get answers.
Well, while a question is coming in, I'll throw the other data one that we're struggling with is how to think about showing the data back to the student. We don't want to sit there and say you've got a 0.65 probability of passing this major or graduating, but on the same time, we want to be making sure we're incenting students to take advantage of all the things that could help them move that needle. And so it's a really interesting discussion of how do you present things to students in a way that is incentivizing them to do the right behaviors.
Okay, we have a question about breaking down silos. Do you have any success stories to share from your university on how you overcame that particular challenge?
I think that so the success story was IR. When we first started this project, IR wanted to go off and build its own data warehouse. And I spent probably a year with our IR director at that time, and he was a great leader. And we agreed that it would be to the institution's disadvantage to have an IT-based data warehouse and an IR-based data warehouse. And what we had to agree upon is that if we built one data warehouse, it had to solve both reporting needs for the campus as well as our official reporting needs for the campus. And so we built in tools to be able to do all of our official reporting out of the data warehouse and to have census data, which is what IR calls it. And as a result, we now have one data warehouse, and IR is really the driver behind making sure that that's used and accurate and has high quality data.
Okay, I got a couple more questions here. One is from somebody working in schools. In my situation, I work with schools with under 14-year-olds, or we are keen on data, but again, I need to investigate more how to reuse and store and when to get rid of that data. Any insight into working with schools or younger folks?
I haven't spent any time, and I know there are different policies for 14 and under than there are for over 14 in terms of COPPA and things like that. And so I don't want to pretend to be an expert in that particular area because I have none.
No worries. And from Carlos, have defined data standards for data. Okay, I guess we're talking about data standards and how do you define data standards as you store them. You have any insight on data standards?
Well, I think the way to think about it is how do you do we use what's called a cube, which is a dimensional model that allows us to sort of store data in a way that we can easily retrieve it. And so what we have done is we worked quite a bit with companies to be coming up with what their cube design is going to be, and to be able to be in a position that we could extend that with additional fields or attributes about the student. And so I would say if you're buying a solution and it has a data warehouse component, knowing that you can extend it and add additional data to the student record is really the key thing for being able to evolve it over time.
Okay, great. Maybe Brian can answer this question. Where can we get more information about OLCAccelerate Toolkit? I know that it's going to be formally released at the NMC Summer Conference, but where would somebody go to track more information about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have nothing formally posted yet, but when it does become available, it'll be at go.nmc.org/DL for digital learning, and that's part of our post-secondary success initiative that we're working on here at the NMC. And you can find not only will you find the toolkit when it becomes available, but you can also find access to our scaling solutions to higher ed's biggest challenges, which is the foundation of not only this discussion, but some of the stuff that's going to be in the toolkit. You can find that publication there, as well as several of the digital learning events that we're hosting as part of this post-secondary success initiative. And again, that's go.nmc.org/DL, and Alex has it in the chat. So thanks.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Okay, from Michelle Reed, in the name of transparency and letting students know that data is being collected, how detrimental to the goal would opt-out options for students be? Any thoughts on that, Jack?
So I think we're going to have, so when we collect data on clubs and organizations, we always give students the opt-out option, that they don't have to have their information scanned. And we think it's important because the last thing we want to do is not have students feeling comfortable attending. And there are some groups where you're just not going to collect information. I mean, there are certain, areas where we just aren't going to get into, checking things. And I think having a thoughtful process, especially around some of the transgender and other groups that you have, you just have to be very sensitive and say, no, we're not going to do these sorts of things in there.
Okay. Lynn, let's see. Lynn Brander, she made a comment. Marie Wallace gave a TED Talk on designing systems for privacy. IBM decided to give employees the choice to allow them to use their data or not. To do this, IBM needed to follow strong transparency and anonymity policies. Thanks for sharing that, Lynn. Next, we have a follow-up to Michelle. Good question. My follow-up would be, what do we do with those students who opt out? And who would they really believe that we have honored their opt-out? How would they know that we honored their opt-out?
At the end of the day, if I would assume a student can, much like FERPA allows students to do discovery, and so to see what information has been collected upon you. And so I would think that would be part of how a student, if you're treating this as FERPA data, this may be one of the things that a student could do. And if you've said you aren't collecting it and then you are, you would obviously be violating what you had committed to the student, and I'm sure someone would sue you.
Looks like they got one more question on here about Caliper and Caliper compliant applications. Are you familiar with any of those, Jack?
I am somewhat familiar with Caliper. And so the idea of Caliper is that with learning management systems, you now have a lot of add-on products. If you think of like an electronic textbook. And so what you really want to be able to do is aggregate the LMS data with the time a student spends in the electronic textbook or some third-party tool to get a comprehensive view for how much they're spending in the class. And what Caliper does is Caliper is supposed to allow these tools to be reporting back the data to the LMS so that it could be integrated. It's in the early stages of this. This is and what's been the limiting factor has been that most LMSs have not been Caliper enabled, but that's starting to change. The new generation of Blackboard, the software as a service version, and Blackboard Ultra will be Caliper enabled. I know the Unison project is working on Caliper enabling Canvas, and Desire to Learn has some projects as well taking on. So you'll be seeing more of that over the next year or so as new products come out in the LMS space. And that should probably spur more development in the tool space.
Okay, just about 30 seconds left, but we have one last question. Could you give an example of a decision you have made that was influenced by the data your systems were supplying?
So I gave one real quick example, which was when we did a study of our math tutoring, we realized overall it didn't have a big impact. But if you could focus math tutoring on students who were retaking a math class, it had a huge impact. And so now we're really focusing math tutoring on those students that are retaking math because they didn't do well the first time.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to wrap things up here. To wrap up today's program, I want to thank Jack and our co-facilitators on behalf of the NMC for taking time to lead today's discussion on student data. Participants, if you want more information about anything you saw or heard today, you can let us know. Let me know by contacting me directly at alex@nmc.org. To learn more about our NMC online programs, you can go to nmc.org, like us on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter at nmc.org. Save the dates. We have 2 upcoming programs that may be of interest to you. April 20th is our Scaling Evidence-Based Methods Across Disciplines. And May 17th is Facilitating the Discovery of Learning Technologies. If these are of particular interest to you, you can go to where you found this program and register for those. And again, plugging the NMC Summer Conference, registration is now open. If you go to nmc.org, you will find more information about the different tracks that we have. So I want to thank you for your time today, and hope you got something out of this. This is an area that there's very few experts, because we are pioneers in this area. We're happy to have Jack, who has been working on this for some time, and to lead our conversation today. So thank you, Jack, and thank you, everyone. You all have a good afternoon.